Hello everyone, good morning. I'm sharing my screen. We're done with absence management, VIP and OTBA reports. We need to do HCM extracts and sandbox, but we will do it towards the end of the program. So what we do as well changes us to 45 and 46. We'll start off with payroll today, or as I leave the numbers as is, but the HCM extracts and sandbox UI customizations are also technical topics. Since we have been doing technical sessions for the past three, technical training for the past three sessions, it becomes too technical if we do HCM extracts and sandbox today. So we'll park these two topics to the end, and we'll start off with a payroll module today. Okay, and I'll give you a high-level overview of payroll module today, and we'll start off with the setups as well. Now, when we do any module, the way we have covered them as, let's say, for example, when we did core HR, we did the configurations in the core HR module. We'd set up enterprise legal and workforce structures. And at the end of it, to test the configurations that we have done a variety of transactions like hiring an employee, terminating him, transferring him, changing a manager, etc. And when we did the absence management, yes, we also proceeded on the similar lines. We did all the setups related to absence management, and we've seen how they can be used to administer or manage leaves of employees. We've seen how employee can do it himself, or how a manager or a HR specialist can also do. In a similar fashion, we'll also cover the payroll, do the setups, and to see whether those setups are working fine or not, we'll also run the payroll for a period or a couple of periods. Okay, and what are the setups involved in a payroll module? Here is a quick list. Yes, we have to, even before you start defining a payroll, you need to configure the bank accounts required first. In layman terminology, what exactly a payroll means, or payroll run means, you paying your employees' salaries. Or when I say you, I'm referring to you as a client here, right? And to make a payment, bank transfer, or you would definitely need banks, right? So the first key configuration that you have to do is to set up the banks. And this includes setting up a bank branch, and a bank account, right? So when you open a bank account, you would open it with a specific bank at a specific branch, and you would be assigned a bank account number, right? When you open a personal account. Like if you go to Citibank and ask them to open an account for you in a New York branch, they would open an account in Citibank New York branch. So in a similar fashion, client also would give you a bank account details from which he wished to make a payment for our salaries. So yes, when we configure bank branches and bank accounts, you would be setting up two different types of bank accounts here. It would be the org bank accounts, or the company bank accounts, or a client bank accounts that you set up. And you would also be setting up employee bank account. Okay. It would be setting up org bank account, employee bank account, and a third-party bank account as well, in case you had to do transfers to any other third party. We'll come to what a third party is later on. But yes, you would be setting up the bank branches and accounts of the organization or a client. We load the account on the employee as well, because remember, when they run the payroll, you get the salary deposited in your bank account, right? In all probability. So we need to have a bank account number captured on employee record as well, and the third parties as well if applicable. We'll come to third parties in a moment. Now, after you define the banks, you have to go ahead and define a payment method, because when you define a payroll, right, this is where you're going to mention all the configurations related to payroll. When you create a payroll definition, that's where you mention quite a few important elements there. And a very important element that you tag or use in a payroll definition is a payment method. In a payroll definition, you need to mention from which of your bank account do you want to make a payment, right? So to the payroll definition, you need to attach a payment method. You cannot attach a bank account directly. So you define a bank first, and then you define a payment method using that. After that, you use that payment method in the payroll setup. And remember, you have the concept of consolidation groups, and these consolidation groups, as you can make out from the name, they would help you to consolidate the payroll results. So consolidation group is a place where the payroll results get stored, and the consolidation group would help you to run the reports at various levels. They would basically help you to consolidate the payroll results and gives you much more control over the payroll data. And then we define payroll elements. Now, whenever you're hiring an employee, say for example, not hiring an employee, whenever you pay employee a salary, you have a payslip generated, right? And what elements do you typically see on earning side? You would typically see two types of elements in the payslip, right? Earnings and deductions. And what do you typically see in the earnings? You would see a basic pay. And if it's a payroll based out of India, you might probably see a HRA, house rent elements, and you might also see LTA, leave travel elements, and you might have some additional options. And when it comes to when you look at the other side of the payslip, what you might have on the other side, if India, I'll also mention it appropriately here. If India, payslip would have below components, right? And on the deduction side, you might see income tax. And you might also see something called as professional tax, right? So you would have elements like this one, like the earnings elements and the deduction elements on a payslip, right? So these earning or a deduction elements that you see on the payslip are nothing but the elements that you create on a payroll. Remember the basic pay, this would be coming from a basic compensation you attach to an employee. I'm not sure how many of you still remember it, but I'll just point you to that particular slide one more time. When we did the core HR, remember we have defined a salary basis. We have defined a grade, first of all. Remember, we have defined a grade, and then we defined a rate for it. We defined a grade called sales executive. We defined a rate, a salary, a grade rate. And here we said for per annum, the salary for a sales executive would be between 45 and 65. Right? So this is what we configured. And then we created a salary basis. And we typically attach the salary basis on the employee record in tab 4. Okay, when you hire an employee, there is a compensation tab, and in that compensation tab, you attach a basic compensation, right? A salary basis, and that salary basis that you attach would determine what is going to be the basic pay for an employee. But all these other elements that you see, right? So you don't have to define an element for basic pay. It would be coming from basic or salary basis attached. But apart from this, any other additional elements that you want to pay, any other, and the tax deductions, right? So this would also be automatically happening in the application depending on the country you select. Okay, depending on the country you select, the tax deductions or tax calculations also happen automatically, provided that country is supported by Oracle in the payroll module. We'll also see what countries have a payroll supported by Oracle in Fusion Cloud, and if the country for whom you are where your client is based out of is supported by Oracle, then you would also see the tax deductions getting calculated accordingly. So if you're probably seeing or if you probably run a payroll for UK, you have, instead of income tax, you have something called as payee tax getting deducted. Payee tax, what does it stands for? It stands for pay as you earn tax. It stands for pay as you earn tax. So this is nothing but this is exactly similar to what we call as income tax in India. So depending on the country you select, there are some statutory deductions that need to happen. Like in case of UK, it would be payee and national insurance. In case of US, it would be something else. In case of India, it would be income tax and professional tax. So such tax deductions would also happen automatically. Now, apart from the basic pay, which would come from salary basis, tax deductions, which happen based on legislation, you need to define additional elements that you want to pay to the employees or that you want to deduct. And to help to understand how these payroll elements work, what we do is we define two earning related elements. We define a medical allowance and we define an overtime allowance. And these two are of earning type elements. And we will also define a club membership allowance, which is of type deduction, just to show you how an earning element work and a deduction element work. So we'll define two earnings elements with different types of configurations. Medical allowance, a flat amount of 200 GBP per employee. Doesn't matter what BU he works for, or etc. And you have an overtime allowance. This would be accrued onto employee record only when he works overtime in a particular month. And we also see how a deduction element works by creating a club membership, wherein 10 pounds are deducted from an employee for using the facilities given by the company. Okay, so we would define payroll elements, and then we will have to define payroll. We would also have to define eligibility for payroll elements. Remember, if you don't define eligibility, or until you define the eligibility for payroll elements, they will not start showing up on employee record. Okay, let me show you a real quick where the payroll elements will show up on employee record. I just sign into the application as HCM implementation user here into ESCC instance. Like this is the sequence of the setups you do. Define, do the bank's configuration, payment methods, define a payroll, use a consolidation group, define the payroll elements, after which you have to define eligibility for the payroll elements. Only after you define eligibility for payroll elements, based on the eligibility profile you attach there, you would be able to add those elements onto employee record when you hire them. Or you can go to, if the employee is already in the application, you can go to person management screen and add the element entry style manually as well. Okay. So you go to my client group, and on the my client group, if you go to person management, and when you hire an employee, right, in step number 6, yes, you define elements and you define eligibility for the elements. When you hire an employee, you would attach a payroll in the compensation tab. Okay, so if we go back to new person screen, when you hire an employee in step number 4, you would be attaching a salary basis. And in step number 3, you would be attaching a payroll. You would be attaching a payroll that you have defined in step number 3. Remember, when you run a payroll, HCM should know for which employees should be picked up and paid salaries, right? So what is the link between employee and payroll? When you hire an employee in tab number 3, HR specialist would include that employee as part of a payroll. Remember, in the third tab, you select whether it is an active payroll status or not, right? When you set active payroll, if you scroll down, we skip that step during the core HR configuration, but you do have an option to attach a payroll to an employee. So if you define a payroll and put 2 or 3 employees in that payroll, then all those employees will be paid when you run that payroll. And in the compensation tab, you attach a salary basis. And after that, remember, you attach a payroll and you attach a basic compensation and any other additional earning elements or deduction elements that need to be paid on to an employee record. What you can do after the employee is hired, what the HR specialist would do is they would go to person management screen. They would go to person management screen and you can enter employee details. So if I search for 100, I'll say I would search for 99. It's okay. I go to a specific employee. Let's say you hired this employee, and whenever you hire an employee, you put him on a payroll. And if you want to see the payroll elements that this employee is eligible for, you can come into the payroll and you can look at element entries. So when you click on element entries, you get to see all the element entries that this employee is eligible for. And remember, you've got too many elements here. Could be confusing. I'll take up another employee where you have only few elements. Let me do 101. Under payroll, if you go to element entries, you would be able to see the payroll element entries there. So this employee, I think you have all the same details here as well, but that's okay. So what is important here to understand is you have all the payroll elements would be showing up applicable for this person on this on this particular page. You have a regular salary and you have a taxation deduction. Remember, whenever you hire a person into a specific country, that particular country's standard deductions or statutory deductions will appear automatically here. And you also have other elements as well that you see, like medical allowance or dental allowance, etc. Right? So yes, this is where. So but the sequence would be that you define payroll, define elements, additional elements apart from the basic pay. You define eligibility for those elements, and then you hire an employee. When you hire an employee, you attach the payroll first of all to the employee, and then you add a salary basis. And after that, you go into a person management screen and you add those element entries, whatever elements or whatever payments or the deductions that employees are eligible for. And then what do? You can, during the month end, after you do all these setups, during the month end, you run the payroll. And there you have two options again. You can do a quick payment, meaning you can pay to a specific employee. You can go to an employee record and run the payroll there. That is called as quick pay. And or you can use a flow pattern, or you can use a flow pattern. Okay, so when you use a flow pattern, what would happen? It's like you have running a payroll is not a simple process. You have many pre steps, calculate payroll, and post steps involved in the payroll processing. So what we usually do is we create a flow pattern, in the sense you mention a list of steps that need to be executed. And you use that flow pattern when you run a payroll, so that whatever pre-process need to be executed first, they would be executed. Then the payroll would be calculated, and after that, the post process would be executed. Okay, so we would be talking about a flow pattern. We'll also see how Oracle has given one. We will use one of the standard pattern given by Oracle, and we'll also see how we can create our own custom flow pattern as well if required. We'll talk more about this when we reach that particular stage. A flow pattern would look something like this one. You have an option. You mention a list of steps in there that you want to implement or include in the payroll processing. So the steps would be something like this. See if there are any retroactive changes to process, meaning you would have run the payroll last month, and you're running on May. You ran on April 31st and you're running on May 30 now, or May 31st. So we need to see if there are, and in April, you would have already paid out salaries to the employees. And when you are running a payroll in May, first of all, you need to select if there are any retroactive changes done on the employee record that need to be processed. So sometimes what might happen, companies might announce a hike and they might say that a salary hike is effective April 1st. But this announcement was done in May, while in April, we already ran a payroll and made the payment. So in May, what we have to do, say for example, let's say you have John with a salary of 4,000 GBP, and he was given a 500 GBP hike. This is a hike in a base salary on effective 1st of April. But in April, he was only paid 4,000, right? So the remaining 500 is still pending for April month. May month, anyways, the salary would be 4,500. So how would the retroactive changes be done? When you go to employee record, right? So you go to salary corrections or regular salary here, you would be able to edit the salary record. I have to log in as a payroll administrator, but you will be able to edit the record and change the salary in a retroactive manner. I can come into the system in May and I can change the salary effective 1st of April. And of course, you can enable auditing if you want to keep track of all the changes. And such retroactive changes need to be identified first before you run the payroll for a month. So when you run a payroll, how much salary would have to be paid to John? 4,500 for May month and 500 for April month, which should be paid out as an arrears. That's what we typically call them. Then you run the payroll, verify the results, and you calculate the prepayments. Like in the prepayments, what we usually do is we generate a prepayments and we show it to you to confirm, or we show the result to the payroll administrator to confirm if everything is fine or not. And in the prepayments, you would be able to see, meaning before the payment is done, you would be able to see the values, exact amount that is going to be paid to each employee and how. If an employee has a bank account attached, it would be an EFT payment. If he doesn't have a bank account, it will be a check payment that will be done. And then those process would be executed so that the payment file would be generated or a check would be printed. And you might have few reports getting triggered in between the steps and towards the end as well. So when you run a payroll every month, we want all these steps to be executed in sequence. We don't want our payroll administrator to go and run these steps in same sequence every month, right? So to handle that, we can create a flow pattern and we can use it when we run the payroll. Okay. So what we do was, let's go ahead and start off with the payroll setups first of all. And what is the first thing that we need to do? We need to define the banks, bank branches and the bank accounts. And even before we do that, if you go into features by country or territory, remember we went to this particular screen when we did the geography session to see what address style is attached to the country, right? Because this address style is going to determine what fields you get to see in the address fields when you select a country. Now you go into this particular task called features by country and territory, search for a particular country. And when you select a country, you would be able to understand what options are given by Oracle for that particular country in Fusion HCM. So if you look at UAE here, for example, UAE or United Kingdom, UK or US, you could see that Oracle has given extensions. It has given global HR payroll interface, and it also supports payroll as well. So meaning for these countries, and you have few more as well. Yes, Oracle Fusion HCM supports payroll for those countries only when this particular checkbox is ticked. If this is not ticked, that means you don't have the payroll extension given by Oracle, in which case the payroll interface would be enabled and you can't pick this one. So the selected extension would be payroll interface here. In case they are implementing payroll, meaning they have elements, salary basis added, etc. But what you do is, since you cannot run the payroll in HCM, you would write a HCM extract. We'll see how that works in one of the technical session. And you extract all the payroll related information to a file, and we send it to a third party vendor like ADP, who runs the payroll at their end with that file that you pass on. In that file, what do you say? Yes, this is a company bank account. From this bank account, you deduct the funds. And to which employees we need to pay the salaries: John 4,500, Tim 3,500, Steve 8,000. So you send a file, a payroll interface in which you include all the details about the payments. That's how it works. Now let's get into the application. Go to this particular task first. Go to global search and you search for features by country or territory. And when you come here, you would be able to see for which countries the payroll extension is supported. Okay, so you have Bahrain, Canada, China, and if you scroll down further, you have few more countries where a payroll is supported by Oracle Fusion in HCM. You have Kuwait, all the Gulf countries you have, Mexico, and you have Qatar, Saudi Arabia, US, UK, etc. So if you look at when you come into this screen, you need to search for the country for which you need to do an implementation of payroll for your client. And if your client is based out of UK, you come in here and you search for United Kingdom here. You notice that yes, payroll is supported. You're doing it for US, yes, you see payroll supported. You're doing it for a client based out of UAE, you see the payroll is supported. So what does this mean? This means, yes, you can do the configurations in the payroll and you can run it. And what does this option ticked means? So if you see a payroll option enabled or payroll extension enabled here, what that means is Oracle would have given many seeded configurations for that particular legislation related to payroll. So for example, if you go to another setup task, you would be able to identify what exactly I mean by it. So if you go to this particular task called configure legislation for HR, I'll leave that the tab open, the previous one. Okay, configure legislations. Okay, I said legislation, it is yes at the end. So if you search for this particular task called configure legislations for HR, in this particular task, you would be able to see that for a given country, you would be able to see whether the payroll is predefined and implemented as well or not. So say, for example, if you are doing an implementation for UK client, you come here, you check if payroll extension is enabled or not. This is the first step you need to do. Now, what if it is not enabled? What if it isn't? If it is not enabled, then yes, you cannot implement a payroll in Fusion HCM for that particular client. Instead, what you do is you can only do a HR and other modules, but you can also do a payroll implementation as well, but you cannot run the payroll. What do I mean by it? That you can implement a payroll, but you don't run it. What that means is, yes, you define the payroll, you do the payroll setups, you mention what payroll elements and each employee is eligible for, earnings and deduction elements. But at the month end, you don't run the payroll in HCM. Instead, you extract the payroll related information, pass it on to a third party vendor who runs the payroll, and they give you information back. Okay, so you basically have the setups captured so that you can let the third party vendor know how much amount needs to be paid out to each employee every month. Okay, so point number 2, if payroll is eligible, that means this will be enabled. So you can enable or implement payroll for that particular country of the client. So you search for United here. You see United States, UK, and UAE. When you go into a specific country, you see it is predefined and implemented as well. And you also see that update is not allowed. So meaning there are some legislation specific configurations done in the application, which will automatically kick in and you don't need to update them. You can't update them. So these, what do we mean by such seeded configurations? It could mean, so these are, every country has certain rules and regulations, right? So if you have an employee working in UK, they have to pay a national insurance, they have to pay payee tax, etc. So such statutory obligations will be factored in or configured already by Oracle in Fusion HCM for UK. So for the country specific configurations would be given by Oracle in HCM, and you see that it is not, update is not allowed, right? You click on the country to see all the features that are implemented, given. Say for example, what do you see here? You see United Kingdom. In case of UK, the financial year starts from 6th of April. In case of UK, the financial year starts from 6th of April. Remember, when does a financial year starts in India? It starts on 1st of April to 31st of March 23. So this would be the typical financial year, right? 1st April of this year to 31st March of next year. And in case of UK, it is slightly different. It is from 6th of April to 5th of April. 6th of April of the current financial year to 5th of April. And in case of US, it is slightly different. It is from 1st of January to 31st of December. So all such configurations, right? Like when does a tax year start? What is the default currency? How do you want to deal with a payroll record for an employee who rejoined you? And in what payment methods can be used to make a payment? So all such configurations or all such options would be visible here. So you see UK, it says a tax year will start from 6th of April. So it doesn't matter whether it is a Sainsbury's to whom you are implementing a payroll, or maybe a retail chain or a manufacturing client in UK. Doesn't matter, they have to follow this particular tax year. They don't have a choice. So all such seeded configurations as per the country rules would be included in HCM. 6th April, financial year start date, you have to pay in pounds. And when employees are hired or rehired, how do you want to pay the employee? What payroll relationship do we want to use? Use the last record, meaning if you fire an employee and if you rehire him, there would already be a payroll relationship in the application. So when you try to rehire him, if you say use last record, you would basically be forcing HR specialists to use the previous payroll relationship that the employee had with the company. But of course, you can update the salary. And whether you have to use a new record or do something else or create a new relationship, it depends on, varies from legislation to legislation again. Legislation in the sense country. And if you go to, you can see all other options there. And if you go to payment types, for example, you would be able to see what payments are allowed. A cash payment is allowed, check payment, EFT, international transfer. All these payments are allowed within UK. So if you want to pay your employees, you can do in any of these modes. And remember, in the case of UK, in India, when we do an electronic funds transfer, it is typically called as NEFT, right? National Electronic Funds Transfer. In the case of UK, it is called BACS, which stands for Bankers Automated Check System. So if you come in here, clearing system, sorry. So the EFT, a payment method that we typically call as an EFT in India, it is called as BACS in UK, which stands for Bankers Automated Clearing System, right? And in case of India, it could be either NEFT or IMPS. So yes, you have the payment types allowed in that particular country defined here and the display name as well. And if you go to calculation codes, you will also be able to see what all statutory calculations that we need to pay. So you see that statutory deductions. If I search for this one, remember that there are many calculation cards. And among those calculation codes, you see that there are some statutory deductions that we need to pay, that every employee need to pay. So when you run a payroll, you need to deduct a national insurance, and a payee tax. Payee stands for pay as you earn a tax equivalent to income tax in India. So you have to deduct these two amounts or elements from the employee record if they are working from UK. Similarly, if you go to a different country, it would be completely different scenario altogether. So if you go to US, a financial year starts from 1st of Jan, not 6th of April. Currency is USD. Use lifetime record. And if you go to payment types, you would be able to see that a cash payment is not allowed in US. Absolutely no. It's only either a check or an EFT. And if you go to calculation cards, you would also be able to see the calculations or deductions that need to happen. So you have the tax rules or tax defined here, like what is the federal tax you need to pay, what is the state tax you need to pay, etc. Similarly, depending on the country that you go into, you would have those calculation cards or the statutory deductions, not just the statutory deductions. Many other deductions applicable for that particular country would also be displayed there. And if you go to India, you again see payroll implemented in the sense Oracle has done all the configurations in the backend, and the financial year starts from 1st of April, Indian rupee, and you can make a payment in cash, EFT, check, etc. And if you look at the calculation cards, you would have a deduction for income tax, professional tax, provident fund, labor welfare fund. So these are all basically the income tax sections that the government of India today supports. Right, so all such configuration cards, all such configurations are given by Oracle. Yes, if required, you can add some additional calculation cards if you want. So, okay, so first of all, you can verify whether the payroll is supported or not. Step number one. If it's not supported, use extract, send the payroll information to third-party vendor, let them run the payroll. You can maintain payroll information in HCM, let the third-party vendor run the payroll, or you can't, or you skip the payroll part completely, in which case you implement only HR and other modules. That is also possible. But if payroll is eligible, yes, you can go into configure legislation for HR to see what are the configurations given by Oracle for that particular country for a payroll. Okay, these are the two prerequisite setups that you need to check before you start doing the configurations. Now let's move on to a configuration one in payroll. What is it? Setting up the banks, bank accounts, and bank branches. How do you do it? Why do we have to do it in first place? A common sense, right? When you run a payroll, you of course want the salaries to be paid from a specific bank account of the company. And when a company opens up a bank account, they do it in a bank at a specific branch, and you have the bank account details there. Right, so we need to define a bank account for organization. And where do you do it from? Go to setup and maintenance. Global search. And you can search for a task called manage banks. And in this particular screen, you have options to define a new bank. So the list of banks that you see here, these are all nothing but the company bank accounts. These are all nothing but the company bank accounts that company uses to make a payment to suppliers or to employees, etc. So you can define a new bank account by clicking on the plus icon here, and assume that client has a bank account with HSBC. Then what do? You enter HSBC in there. And to make it easy for us to identify what setups we have done, we'll just prefix a batch identifier. So you need to first select the country for the bank name, I'll do a replacement. So let's say your client has a bank account with HSBC. What do? You enter HSBC there. So just to make it easy for us to identify that it is our bank in the instance, because you have too many banks configured, we'll just prefix a batch identifier. And you have to enter other bank related information that's provided to you by the client, like what is the taxpayer ID, tax registration number, what is the bank code, etc. Or you can leave them blank if you want. So the bank code, yes, you can enter the information that I have given here. So this is like a bank number that you're capturing. And you can also have a description if you want. And another important point is you can add an address to this particular bank, maybe the headquarters of the bank, and you can also have a contact point of the bank. Okay, so if required, you can add an address and you can attach a contact point as well. So in case something goes wrong, or if you want to talk to the bank, you don't need to figure out or you don't need to hurry at the last minute to identify who is the right person to talk to. You can capture the address and a contact if required. Just click on the plus icon and enter the details. Save and close. And after you define a bank, remember we created a bank now. And to that particular bank or on that bank, you can create a branch. If you click on view branches, we don't have any. So we can create a branch on the particular bank, or after you select the bank, you click on create a branch. So that whatever bank you selected, that bank details would default onto this particular screen. Remember, you have separate tasks for manage banks, manage bank branches, and manage bank accounts. If you want, you go to individual setup tasks and do the configuration, or only from the manage bank screen itself, we have option to define branch and an account as well. We will usually do it this way. And yes, it's a London branch. You mentioned the branch name. Let's say your client has a bank account with a London branch in HSBC or Central London Bank, and you have something called as a sort code in UK. Remember, how do you identify a bank uniquely in India? We have something called as IFSC code, right? Similarly, if you want to identify a bank branch uniquely in UK, you need to enter a sort code, a unique identifier for a bank branch. You enter it there. And you mention the city and the branch. That's okay. And you can mention the SWIFT code as well, the BIC or a SWIFT code. So this would be used while making the payments, a SWIFT code. And you have a branch number type. You can mention whether it is a sort code or not. Yes, there is only one option called sort code. You can leave it blank, and you can also mention whether it is which type of a bank branch is it. Okay, is it a SWIFT branch or is it a different type of a branch? And again, the same options available. You can attach the address of a bank branch and a contact point of that specific branch so that you can talk to them in case something goes wrong. See, now you have defined a bank and you have created a branch. Now, if you go to view branches, you should be able to see that branch created. And if I click on view accounts, I won't be able to see any because I don't have any account. I can create a new account by clicking on this. And that would help me create an account on HSBC Bank in a London branch. So you see the bank defaulted, a branch is also defaulted from the previous screens, and you can enter the details here. So I would call it as a payroll bank, UK payroll GBP account. So what the way we name a bank account is, yes, you can mention a specific bank account name, or you can follow a specific naming convention here when you mention an account name. So if you are defining this account with HSBC and you tell them that you want to use this bank account to process the payroll, you can give a meaningful names for that particular account in HCM. At least you can say, yes, I want to use it to run the payroll and I want to make a payment in GBP, and you can mention that it is an account. Payroll GBP account, payroll USD account, you can mention it appropriately. And I will prefix the batch identifier. And this is the account number. Currency is going to be GBP and the legal entity name. Remember, the legal entity is quite important because that is where before you could run a payroll, you need to have employees in the application, right? And you can hire employees only when you have legal employer, and you need to attach that legal entity here, because when you run the payroll, there would be financial transactions happening there, and you would have to report on them, and you would typically do such reporting from a legal entity level. So you can attach a UK legal entity there. And you can mention what type of account it is. Is it a checking account or a savings account? Okay, or you can leave it blank. And you can mention an international bank account number if you want. IBAN stands for international bank account number. It is like a 14-digit number with the help of which you can transfer amount from any other country. Okay, so you can mention an account number there. And you can also mention in which modules do you want to use the bank account. Do you want to use this bank account to pay the suppliers? In payables module, do you want to use this to make a payments to the employees and using it in the payroll module? Do you want to use this bank account to receive the cash from customers in the case of receivables? So depending on what modules you want to use this account, you enable those options accordingly. So if you want to use this bank account only to run the payroll in HCM, you enable only payroll. Okay, but there's nothing that you lose by enabling it for other modules as well. And if you scroll down, you also need to tag a GL accounts here, GL accounts, GL code combinations. You would be given this information by a finance consultant. Remember setting up the accounting key flexible structure or letting you know what combination you need to use as cash account or cash clearing account. It would be the job of a finance consultant. So you would fill in that information here that a finance consultant is going to give you, enter those account details, etc. And you also have controls as well here. Controls is fine. You can put in some limits if you want, or how do you want to reconcile, etc. Security, and this is important. So you can control which users can see this particular bank account. Okay, so you can say secure bank account by users and roles. And when you say secure, if you don't secure it, it would be available for everyone. If you secure it, then you need to click on the plus icon and you need to mention which users should be able to see this bank account, or users with what role should be able to see and use this bank account. So you can do something like this. You can say that only the payroll administrators should be able to see this bank account. In which case, what do? You select role and you say payroll administrator and you secure it that way. Yeah, you see your payroll administrator here, payroll administrator. And when you do it that way, yes, when you click on save and close here, then only payroll administrators will be able to see this particular bank account. Or you can also secure it by user as well if you want. Okay, you can restrict the access. And you can also grant access, business unit access to this particular bank account. Remember, when you hire an employee, where do you use a business unit? In the assignment record, right? When you hire an employee, you select legal entity in the first tab, and in the third tab, employment tab, you create an assignment against a business unit. So which business unit assignments do you want to pay using this particular bank account would be dependent on what you enter here. And I will select UK business unit here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, what exactly you need to enter as a code combination of accounts here, that would be given by the finance consultant. You just go ahead and select a finance UK business unit, go ahead and save and close it. So this way you can create a bank. So you can directly go to manage bank screen. And in this particular screen, yes, you can define a bank, create a branch on it, and then you define an account in that particular branch and you configure all those details. And what we do tomorrow, so we're done with step number 1, and in step number 2, we have to define payment methods. And when we define a payment methods, yes, we'll see how to create 3 different types of payment methods to capture payment related information of the client, employees, and the third parties. And when we set up a third party, I'll explain what a third party is. Any questions, guys, in what we have covered today?
Prasad, I do have a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
So recently we created bank branches, bank accounts. For example, we have multiple employees and they have a same bank account. For example, bank A, correct? But the account is different. So in that case, we have to create bank differently for all these employees, or one bank will suffice and accounts will be different.
No, it also depends on in which bank those employees have accounts.
For
So if
example,
it's yeah,
let's say
if
let's
it's
say Citibank. Let's say, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Let's say we have a Citibank, correct? So we have 100 employees who are having an account in Citibank. So it means
Mhm.
that we have to define 100 times Citibank, or only 100
No,
accounts you have to define.
the second one.
100 accounts within the same
100
bank.
accounts. Yeah. We only just have to define a bank here, and then we can when we define an account, remember the bank account that we defined here, right? So this is a company bank account. And
Okay.
tomorrow, what we're going to do, I'll take you to an employee record. I will take you to an employee record, and I'll show you how to add a personal payment method. And it is there you attach a bank account details for an employee. But yes, if you have 100 employees who have account with a Citibank, different, of course, account numbers would be different. You would define a bank only once. And if, say, for example, 60 of them have accounts with one branch, 40 have accounts with another branch, then you define one bank, two branches, and under the first branch, you define the 60 accounts. Under the second branch, you define 40 accounts. You don't duplicate the banks. You would only create the accounts. When we do the personal payment method configuration, it will become more clear.
Okay. One more thing.
Mhm.
So we created banks. So these are the banks defined in cash management. So we are using the same banks, or payroll banks are
Exactly.
different then?
No. These are the managed banks screen is a cash management related setup. We use the same banks. Whenever you define a bank account, if you intend to use it in payroll, you enable this option. It's a cash management bank that we are using.
And one more thing, one last. So we
Mhm.
define the payment terms and payment methods. So these are the same we pulled from the payables, just like wire transfer, payment method, check, and cash. So these are the same one which we as we defined in the payables.
No, we don't use a. So I'll explain this tomorrow when we do the payment method setup, right? You would have a check or EFT payments, right? So those
Yes.
would be the payments that are given by Oracle. No, they don't come from payables or other modules. They come from a legislation specific configurations given by Oracle. Remember when we went into this particular task, configure legislation for HR, when you click on a specific country, you are able to see the payment methods there, right? Payment times supported. In case of UK, cash payment was allowed, but in case of US, it's not allowed. So it is from a country specific rules that we are getting those payment methods, whether a cash is allowed or check is allowed or something is allowed or not for payables or any other module. Okay, it's country specific.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.